Tries to lock Howard. Tackle on the play by Narsaki.
Reception 21.
Down's pass complete to number 21. Keelan Strong for a Sun Devil first down. Sulphur's pass complete. To number 80, Chris Barnes. First and 15 from the 26.
Well, for this week here on the One-on-One show, we got another long-time Arizona sports PA announcer. If you might have heard him at Sun Devil Stadium. He's the public address announcer for Sun Devil football and men's basketball from 1991 was your first year. And you're still calling the games now, which is amazing. And also you were the former PA announcer for the Suns from 1993 to 2005. I hope I got that correct. 2005 to 2011. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
And also
the Nash Stoudemire Marion era.
Yeah. My numbers are a little off today. And you were also at that same time period, the public address announcer for the team I work for now, the Arizona Rattlers.
Yep. And
you've also done spring training and all that, but it is none other than the one and only Jeff Scott. And it's good to have you here, Jeff.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. Appreciate it, Caleb.
So I guess I'll start it very simple. You also have a history of working in the newsroom with KTAR and Fox 10, but how did you end up getting into the whole sports media business?
In a circuitous way, I was working at KTAR, and Stan Richards was our was the public address announcer for the Suns for many years. He was also the production director at KTAR. In the late 80s, early 90s, the Suns were about to migrate over to America West Arena, and the team and Stan decided it might be a good time to pass the torch to a younger generation. They did some public auditions, and Stan personally asked me if I would be interested in auditioning, and I did. I had never done public address before, and what a way to say hello world by maybe becoming public address announcer for the Suns. This again was the pre-Barkley era, when they were still at the Coliseum. Went out and did their audition, which basically entailed reading some starting lineups and with some fancy names and a couple of announcements, and they narrowed it from about 30 down to about 8. They took us all up to Flagstaff, and we each did a little bit of the Sun scrimmage when the training camp was back there. And then they narrowed it down to 4, and I was one of the final 4. And we each did a quarter of a preseason game that was actually played at the Activity Center at ASU. And lo and behold, I didn't get it. I was one of the runner-ups, but as it turned out, after the season, the regular season, they decided to make a change. They decided, you know what, Stan wasn't so bad after all. And they brought him back for the playoffs that year. And after that season, I think the plan was to bring him back the following season. Unfortunately, he passed away in the offseason. And I think the Suns at that point decided, you know what, we're not going to try any more amateurs. We're going to go to a professional. And they poached Jeff Munn from ASU basketball over to the Suns. Jeff was doing ASU football as well. And as a result of my audition for the Suns, ASU came and asked if I would be interested in auditioning for the men's basketball job. And as it turned out, I wasn't in town when they had the audition. I came in and actually did some public address announcements during a scrimmage, and I got the job. When I got home from that audition, I already had a message on my answering machine offering me the position. So that's a long story, but yeah, that's how I got started back in the early 90s when I was just a kid.
And just to make sure everyone knows, the ASU Activity Center, that's Desert Financial Arena right now.
Yeah, I don't think it's had a new coat of paint since then, but yes, it's gone through a few different name changes over the years. But yes, that was what we used to call it back then, the Activity Center.
Yes, that's the OG name is what people would call it. Mm-hmm. And not only that, I mean, you've seen like college football has changed dramatically over the years. I think you mentioned Jeff Munn. His probably most memorable moment of the PA announcer was trying to get the crowd to quiet down. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, that didn't really work because of the whole controversial crowd noise rule and all that. But, you mentioned the whole auditioning and, with like up to 30 people, was that ever intimidating for you? And for you, like, how did you overcome that?
Yeah, I mean, I did figure I was a long shot at best, so I didn't have a lot of pressure to perform because I just didn't think that it was a realistic chance that I was going to be selected to be the PA announcer. I didn't realize at the time that I was going to be one of the finalists. So it wasn't very intimidating. I just looked at it as a fun opportunity. As we progressed along that process, it became a little more nerve-wracking. And anytime to this day that I do an event that I'm not really comfortable doing, that I'm not used to doing, like a soccer or a gymnastics or something to that effect that I am not really comfortable doing because I haven't done it before, I still get nervous. I don't want to screw up, even if there are 5 people there or 50,000. You just don't want to make a mistake that people are going to whisper to each other just after it happened. Then, what's this guy all about?
Oh, absolutely. And then, taking a look back at the early 2000s period and also the 90s period in the Arizona sports, I always call it like the Arizona sports boom, kind of similar to like what Las Vegas is going through right now, when you start to see the formation of all the big Arizona sports teams, the Diamondbacks and the Rattlers and the Coyotes were all kind of created around that same time period. But for you, when you first, your first few years at Sun Devil Stadium, what was that like? Was there like any kind of rookie mistakes you've made and like some growing you had to do at the time? Like, I guess you can say like the typical growing pains.
Yeah, I mean, I've been going to games at Sun Devil Stadium for years, and so I was used to the atmosphere and the makeup and so forth. But you don't realize how detached you are from a sporting event until you're actually working it, and you're responsible for knowing who carried the ball, who made the tackle, how much yard was gained. It was just a kind of a rude awakening those early couple of years. And I did make a lot of mistakes, misidentifying players or not doing the math right when they cross the 50-yard line. You have to do that quickly in your head. You realize that there's a lot more to it than just sitting there and calling out great play and first down. I have a spotter with me who helps me identify numbers because I don't like to use binoculars because I lose a little bit of depth perception. I like to know right away if they've been able to gain enough yardage for a first down. And so, those early days were when you figure out exactly what you need to be better at, what you need to do more homework on, how you need to better prepare for a game so that you don't make those mistakes when you actually have a live mic. The other thing is you realize very quickly that you have to deal with the not quite half-second delay between the time you speak into the microphone and the time it goes out to the rest of the stadium. And it takes a little bit of getting used to every single year, but that's a little bit of a degree of difficulty that I didn't anticipate when I first took the job.
And it's still like that now, the delay, like it was like that then, and then they still
it's actually a little worse because of the open end of the stadium on the north side. It rattles off all those buildings sometimes, and so you get an extra set of echo that comes back towards you. But it just takes a couple of minutes, and once you're used to it, it's fine. But it is a bit jarring the first time you hear yourself rattling back at you in that echo chamber of Sun Devil Stadium.
Yeah, that can be very, I say, scary in the moment if I was the one announcing all that, because that could be very hard to overcome on the spot. But Sun Devil Stadium, it's a very rowdy environment because when they scored the touchdown, you got the fireworks shooting off and all that. Did that kind of affect your announcing and all that, being in that kind of environment? Because it's not like the Cardinals, for example, like they don't really have, compared to ASU, they don't really have like the big touchdown tradition where they shoot off fireworks literally because there's mountains in between the stadium.
True. Yeah, I think that's part of the tradition that's so great, right? Is the fact that the student section is really into it, and then you have those traditions like the alma mater before the game and the fireworks going off and so forth, and that's just great. That's college football, and that's why it's so much fun to be a part of. I was going to games as a season ticket holder for many years before I became the public address announcer. And that was what I looked forward to the most, was those traditions, everybody decked out in their maroon and gold, everybody really getting on the opposition and everybody really getting behind the team. And, when I first moved to Arizona back in the late 70s with my family, this was the only game in town. There were no Cardinals games. There were no Diamondback games. There were no Rattler games. There were no really sports of anything other than AAA baseball here and the Phoenix Suns during basketball season. And so when it was time for Sun Devil football, the stadium was packed. The first season I was out here was the first year that they had expanded. Sun Devil Stadium was their first year in the Pac-10. And there were 72,000 people every game, even for the opening game against the University of Pacific, which was the first game I ever attended as a fan. There were lots of people there, and that was a big event for this community. And it still is. I mean, I think people are still emotionally invested in Sun Devil football, but because there are so many other things splitting our loyalties and how we spend our money on sports dollars, I think it has changed, and it's more difficult to win people over and convince them to come to a game on a Saturday night.
Yeah, and out of all the years you've gotten to announce for ASU, I mean, there's been a lot of great players. The ones I kind of grew up with were Brock Osweiler, Taylor Kelly. That I've been through a lot of quarterback eras, sadly. But was there like a favorite team specifically that you love to be a part of during your time at ASU?
A team. I think that year that they played for the Pac-12 championship at Sun Devil Stadium against Stanford was a fun year. A few years ago was if anytime you exceed expectations, you underpromise and overdeliver. Those are the fun years. But as far as players go, I think Andrew Walter was the quarterback like when I first started. Rudy Carpenter, and then seeing running backs like Benjamin and Kalen Balaj, receivers like Nikhil Harry and Jalen Strong. There have been a lot of great players. Kickers like Zane Gonzalez, and the different coaches who come through who have gotten a chance to at least meet and talk to. There have been several eras just in these last 2 decades of Sun Devil football that have experienced highs and lows. But yeah, I've enjoyed the entire ride, and I just enjoy being a very, very small part of the program.
And that's another thing I forgot to mention too. You also, and at the time, the Pac-12 football championship, kind of like how the Arena Bowl was in the old AFL days, was highest seed. So whichever team had the higher record going into the matchup would host it. And in that case, I believe it was 2012. I could be wrong, but they hosted Stanford after they had just got that win against U of A to clinch that home field. And so that was, and I was at that game too. It was very cold and very, very, very uncomfortable. But it was a very different environment because even though it was at Sun Devil Stadium, they kind of designed it like it was supposed to be like a neutral site. There were no fireworks that were shot off during the touchdowns. And from what it sounded like, it's like, did you have to be very neutral to both teams compared to the typical home field environment?
They did kind of ask me to tamp it down a little bit to not necessarily make it like a neutral field, but not to do the typical, first down and Sun Devil ball and that sort of thing. And I did have, unlike the regular season where we had the ASU marketing team and game operations crew in the booth with me, we had those people, but also a production company that was working specifically for the Pac-12 and also for, I guess, ESPN or whoever was televising the game that night. Neil Everett was in our booth for a while, and he took part in the halftime throw the ball in the hole.
Oh yeah, that's I believe it's called the Dr. Pepper football toss.
That's it. Yeah.
Footballs into a soda can.
Right. So he was hanging out with us for a bit, and it was different. It was a different kind of setup, and you're used to your normal setup, and it was the same booth and the same microphone, but it was a kind of a different set of circumstances that made it a little bit different. Yes, I had to, be a little quiet. They didn't really have to tell me to keep it quiet because ASU did not play very well that night. It was a pretty one-sided game, unfortunately, in Stanford's favor. But it was fun nonetheless. I remember that the previous year they played the game in Oregon, and their public address announcer was very well known and throughout the conference. And they actually brought in a neutral public address announcer to do that game. So I figured they might do the same in Tempe. I don't know if I take it as a compliment or an insult that they allowed me to do it, but at the end of the day, unfortunately, it was the Cardinal who went to the Rose Bowl.
Yeah, and now the Pac-12 championship is a neutral site, and although it's great, Allegiant Stadium is amazing, and there's a lot of logistical obstacles that they're able to overcome by having it be a neutral site, but do you think, looking at it from a fan perspective, do you think they should have kept it highest seed?
I do. I think that the loyalties of most of the schools in the conference don't really promote a big number of fans traveling to a neutral site game that isn't the Rose Bowl. So I think that if you kept it on campus, you certainly would have had a better fan response. And I just look at our own experience where we had it at Sun Devil Stadium and they were able to sell close to 70,000 tickets in less than a week. It was a lot of fun and there was a big buzz in the community. And I think that you remove that by moving it to a neutral site. I understand why they do it because it's definitely logistically a lot easier to plan something months out than a few days out. But at the same time, I think from a fan perspective, it would have been fun to keep it on campus.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest case I always try to make when it's highest seed is that it has a better chance of selling out versus if it's neutral site, it's going to be hard for the conference to even get half of that stadium full. So
Yeah, I think you look at it and you see it when it was in Santa Clara, now in Vegas. You see some of those empty. So they're doing better, I think, at Vegas. But when they had it up in Northern California, there were a lot of empty seats, and that's not a good look for anybody. Again, I understand why the need to be able to plan these things so you can rent hotel rooms and you have easier access for television production facilities and so forth. But it was fun while it lasted, and it can be done.
Now looking at the scope of college football now, you got the NIL deals and you got the conference jumps. Won't get into that too much, but like, what do you think of how the direction of college football is going now? And do you think that this is healthy for the sport, or is it just going to keep being the same as it always has been? More competitive, maybe not?
We'll have to watch how it develops here over the next few years. Being an ASU fan, I don't know how this is going to work out. Obviously we're going to get on bended knee to a lot of these boosters to see if they can help contribute and keep some of these athletes from looking for a bigger stage and better dollars somewhere else. As far as the tradition of college football, those big colleges are always going to be, the place to be on Saturdays. You're always going to have the tailgates. You're always going to have the packed stadiums. But as far as ASU goes and where they fit into all of this, we'll see how it develops here over the next few years, because the Pac-12 is now going to become the Pac-10. Maybe they'll go after some Mountain West Conference schools. Maybe they'll try to just keep it at the Pac-10. But if other schools defect to either the Big 10 or the Big 12, then it's going to be interesting to see. I don't think it will stay the same. I think it will be bigger than ever before because the dollars are just incredible. What you see CBS, NBC, and Fox paying in terms of television rights to the Big Ten. But is that going to exclude some of these other schools? Or is it an opportunity for a conference like the Pac-10 to make a deal with like ESPN and be the featured conference on a Saturday night and a Saturday afternoon because they've been shut out of the rights discussions for these other schools? So it's difficult to say. I don't think it's going away, college football, but it may be more difficult to compete for the spotlight because you have some glaring spotlights on some schools and dimming spotlights on others.
Yeah, I mean, it is tough. I will say I do think what ASU is trying to do, at least on the home game side and the opponents, like, although it sucks they have to plan this like 10 years ahead of time, but they literally got a game that they're hosting against Florida that is not going to take place for like another 5 years. I hope you're going to be announcing that game. So,
if they'll let me, I'll be announcing it.
Oh yeah, but they'll obviously have more competition in the future. But with the conference realignment and all that, it's going to be even harder and harder to make those games happen. But of all the the games hosted at Sun Devil Stadium, you've had a couple of great opponents. I mean, well, no, Georgia probably wasn't the greatest, but I would say that Notre Dame game was very memorable. But you've seen a lot of visiting teams kind of come and go, and a lot of them, like SEC schools, are big travel, Big Ten as well. Is there any opponent in particular that had like the biggest turnout, or I guess you can say stadium invasion at Sun Devil Stadium, that really just impressed you? Right.
Well, you mentioned the Georgia game. Remember the LSU game that they played here, which was actually relocated from Louisiana because of the flooding there after Katrina. And they played that game here and had to sell tickets on short notice. And a lot of the fans from LSU, despite what they were going through in their hometown with the flooding and the devastation from the storm, made it out here for that game. And we actually played the LSU intro video, even though we were doing the game as essentially an ASU home game. Because it was supposed to be an LSU home game. And I think in deference to what that community was going through, we kind of gave them their props before the game. But I was very impressed with the fan base and how they were able to travel under those circumstances. You mentioned the Georgia game. I mean, the time that game was played, I remembered that there were people from Georgia. It's such a difficult ticket to get in Athens that apparently people were actually buying ASU season tickets because that would be cheaper than scalping a ticket in Georgia. So people were buying season ticket packages, selling the rest of the games, and then they all came out here for that game, which they decisively won. And you mentioned Notre Dame. the Notre Dame fan base is everywhere, and it's certainly here in the Phoenix area. And so when just to see the golden helmets out in the field is pretty exciting to be a part of. And there were lots of Notre Dame fans there. But just like the Nebraska game eons ago back in 1996, there were a lot of Notre Dame fans who ended up cheering for ASU because they saw that's the way the wind was blowing on that particular day. They support the Sun Devils when they're not supporting the Irish. The Sun Devils were having a good day. The Irish weren't having a good day, and everyone went home happy.
Oh yeah, that I gotta say that Nebraska game. Out of all the games where people have stormed the field, that probably ranks as number one of all time at Sun Devil Stadium. Although I think that game against UW was also pretty important. Now I'll get to men's basketball here, switching gears to that for a little bit. You know, ASU basketball under the Bobby Hurley era. And I remember as a student, literally one of my most memorable times as a student was sitting front row for the KU game, and they ended up winning that and should have gotten the number one spot, but that we ended up failing at the Pac-12 season anyway, so we kind of didn't really deserve that. But, you know, working the basketball games, that's also different because you also got the 942 crew, which I got to be part of with the whole curtain of distraction, and that really what makes ASU unique in the college basketball world. But what are your thoughts on, you know, ASU hoops nowadays, the DFA as they call it?
Yeah, it's it's a different. You're looking at the possibility of a different team every year because of the ability of players to move on and resume their playing career somewhere else without having to sit out a year. I really am a big fan of Coach Hurley. I love his intensity. I like his style of play, and he's brought some great athletes into the program over the years. And I think that they're always just that close. You know, you mentioned that the KU win was just a huge win. They've had some big home wins over the rivals to the south, and had a great win, a triple overtime win last year against UCLA at home on a Saturday night. You know, they are a fun program to watch. And, you know, if you haven't gotten behind them because you're waiting for them to be a national title contender or something like that, or you tend to, you know, gravitate more towards the NBA, I would strongly encourage you to come out and watch Coach Hurley's teams play. They're fun, and the atmosphere is fun. And it's especially fun when there are a lot of people in the stands. You know, you have the pep band, and as you mentioned, the 942 crew, and it's and the games tend to run a little bit shorter, and you're in and out in a couple of hours, and it's affordable, and they're fun. They're fun to watch, and it's major college basketball, and I really wish that more people would get behind them because you know, they are a program worth supporting and helping to boost to the next level.
And what were the differences you would say going to an ASU basketball game compared to going to Suns? Like the biggest difference I realized is that, you know, when the play's going at the Suns, they're actually playing some kind of like organ music or something like that. ASU does not do that. They actually are kind of relying on chants from 942 crew to kind of get the crowd fired up. So what are some differences you would say going to college basketball compared to the NBA?
Well, I've done both, and I think that, you know, you can make an argument for both. The NBA is very, very produced. You know, you have music, you have videos, you have dancers, you have routines, you have mascots, you have everything. And it's, I think, intended because, you know, it's not cheap to go to an NBA game. And I think that the goal is to make sure that, you know, someone going to their first game and it's a real stinker is still compelled to come back and spend their money and watch another game in the future. With college basketball, it's a lot more organic. You know, you have students, you have parents, you have people who just have supported the school all their lives. And as opposed to, you know, you definitely have diehard fans who root from the heart in the NBA, but with your school, with your alma mater, with the local university, there's an emotion both in football, basketball, and all the other sports where it's you really wear your heart on your sleeve. And, you know, you feel bad for the team when they lose and you feel great for the team when they win. And it's just a difference maker, and it's a completely different atmosphere. I think, you know, because you play 82 games in the NBA's regular season, you drop a game, it's not that big a deal. You play far fewer games in college basketball, you drop a home game, and that's kind of a disappointment. So there's that going for it too. There's just a lot more riding on it, as there is in college football.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I'll wrap it up here in just a biz. I know we're coming across 30 minutes, but yeah, I mentioned one more team here. And that is the team that I have a long history with, the Arizona Rattlers in the Arena Football League, now Indoor Football League as they call it now. But you were the public address announcer for them for quite a while during some of the great years with the start of the Nick Davila era. You were also there when Seth Bonner had his last few years with the team. And so what was your kind of overall experience would you describe? Because I will say, going to a Rattler game and a Sun Devil football game, there's a lot of similarities. Literally, there's a cannon blast, which it's still hard for me to get used to in the broadcast booth. But that cannon blast, up until was it last year, I found out it's by the same exact crew who does the fireworks at Sun Devil Stadium, the whole fireworks production crew. But what would you say going to a Rattler game was like for you during your time announcing it?
Well, I had been a fan prior to that. If you recall, I don't know if you recall, this goes back a long time, 30 years, but the Rattlers were the first team to play in what was then America West Arena. Their season started several months before the Suns' first season in that building. So they were able to build a fan base just from people curious about the sport because they wanted to check out the new building. This is the first time we'd had a new arena in many years. And I remember going to those games when Danny White was the coach, and the place was packed. Every single game, the place was packed, and people went to maybe check out the building, but ended up really enjoying the product. And years later, when I was doing those games, it was fun. It was a lot of fun because the fans are very loyal, and there were a core group of people who had been there for every game, every year, and treated the Rattlers like many fans treat ASU. They really love to see the team do well and play well. And the last game that I was their public address announcer for was the Arena Bowl, which was a really good game, but and a big crowd, and they lost on the very last play of the game. The opponent scored a touchdown with no time left on the clock, and it was devastating. And my children were much younger at that time, and my son was inconsolable. I mean, he literally cried because of the way that game ended. So I do have the one difficulty I had was that the PA announcer normally, like for ASU football, I'm way up at the top, several stories from the field, and I get a good.
Yeah, you're in the corner. Right?
Yeah, and for the Rattlers games, we're right in the end zone, so you don't have much depth perception. You're going to have to look up at the scoreboard to see exactly where the ball is being placed, and therefore that's how you determine what the yardage gain was on a particular play and whether there's a first down or not and so forth. So it wasn't easy, and you are largely a cheerleader to get people to make noise and stand up and get behind your Rattlers and so forth. But because the crowd was responsive, which is all that you ask for as a part of the game, I really did enjoy my years with the Rattlers and wish them many years of success.
Yeah, and we were talking about this earlier. That last game you called, which was the Arena Bowl, the team they lost to, which was a touchdown pass from Aaron Garcia to Jerron Harvey, and it was 14,000 seats. The Suns weren't really doing well at the time, so it was one of the packed houses in a while at what was at the time called the U.S. Airways Center, and the crowd. It was a nationally televised game on the NFL Network. It was huge, and then all of a sudden you see that happen, and it literally sounded like a bomb just dropped. Everything just went dead quiet. And it was like an evacuation drill. Everyone cleared the arena in like 5 to 7 minutes because it was bad. So
yeah, I remember that well. I was looking forward to, hoping that they could, overcome that loss and maybe win a championship at some point down the line. But that was the last Rattlers game I ever announced. But of all the sports that I have done, and it includes some Major League Baseball as well. And you mentioned Cactus League, and I've done a number of Diamondback games on a fill-in basis over at Chase Field, and the NBA All-Star Game in 2009 that the Suns hosted, got to do all of that and all the events surrounding it, and some big events where there was a lot of effort and time put into it. But that Arena Bowl was right up there, right near the top of the list of fun events and ones that really you have to really check yourself to make sure that you don't get too emotionally invested in the outcome on the field so that you can do your job. And that's not always easy to do.
Well, to kind of close it out here, what was kind of your favorite moment as a public address announcer for not just ASU, but for any sports? We didn't really get to mention this, but you were during the Suns, you also got to call some great playoff games during the whole Sean Marion era and Steve Nash and Amari Stoudemire, that great Suns team, the team I grew up watching. What was kind of your favorite game to announce of all time?
There were a lot of really fun Suns games. That first season that I was there, the 2005-2006 season, which was right in the midst of the 7 seconds or less era, the Suns knocked off the Lakers. And if you recall, they had fallen behind in that series and came back to force a decisive game and then ended up just blowing out the Lakers. That was when I think Coach Jackson asked Kobe Bryant to start passing the ball more. So he said, okay, you want me to pass? I won't shoot. So every time he got the ball, even if he was wide open, he passed the ball, and Suns ended up winning easily. And we did the traditional Andy Griffith theme to signify that the Lakers were going fishing, and the gorilla walked out on the court with his fishing rod. That was a lot of fun. Those years were a lot of fun because, again, every game was sold out. It was an event every time the Suns took the floor, and that was exciting. But you mentioned, and we talked about it earlier, but that KU game against ASU in basketball was also right at the top of the list. I mean, what a great atmosphere that night. And I don't think many people gave them a chance of knocking off the number one team in the country on national television on a weeknight. And they came out and they just played really well. I mean, we kept looking up at the scoreboard and seeing, how much it seemed like the clock just didn't tick. It seemed like every second was 15 minutes. And as we were getting toward the end of the game and realizing this was a possibility, it was hold on tight. And then seeing the fans rush the floor, which they've done a number of times over the years. And I'll be entering my 32nd year as PA announcer for the ASU basketball team. That was just a thrill, a real thrill to watch and see. And
not only that, but you were also like the public address announcer usually is right up on the court in the desk. So when students were rushing the crowd, like, were you guys worried safety wise? Like you were like going to have some traffic over there?
They used to have the, I think it was called the Nike Desert Classic, where they would bring in some of the top high school prospects from around the top college prospects from around the country, and the NBA scouts would all watch it. And I did the public address announcing for that. It was held at ASU one year, and a guy came over after a loose ball and kicked me right in the face. And, I got fat lip, broke my glasses, everything. That was the only time I really felt in danger. The very first year I was doing ASU basketball, Bill Frieder was the coach. It was the time of the Frieder Fanatics, and they knocked off University of Arizona for the first time in the Lute Olson era, since they became good. And the fans rushed the court, and Frieder got up on the scorer's table and actually talked. And he, at one point, he had his back to me, and he was kind of walking backwards, and he took about a step and a half in my direction to the point where I had to kind of support him, push him in the back to keep him up on the scorer's table. But after the KU game, the fans came down, and Remy Martin actually got up on the scorer's table right in front of me. And if you look at the video of that, you probably see me shooting video on my cell phone. But what a great night! And going back, I just didn't want the night to end. Going into the arena that night and seeing the students lined up around the building, what a thrill! And to see them still there when I left the building about 40 minutes after the final horn, and seeing them celebrating out on Mill Avenue was just a real exciting night that I'll never forget.
Yeah, like I said, I was at that game, and on top of that, I was one of the students that went to Camp Fargo and all that, and being out there, pretty much camping out there for 48 hours leading up to that game. That was entirely worth it. Do not regret 1 second of that. And I'll remember being in that, like, I guess you can say that crowd pit and all that. There was a lot of "We want Duke" chants and all that, because it felt like if we can beat KU, we can beat anybody.
Yeah, it's never that simple, right? Because you have to get up for every single game, and unfortunately, that was easier said than done. But we'll always have that night.
Yeah, and then the very next game we lost to Princeton, which all our dreams instantly crushed in one game.
Yeah, it's just like the Notre Dame football game. What did it? I think Notre Dame was ranked 4th at the time, and ASU got the upset win, and then went up to Oregon State and had a disappointing loss the following week. So it happens that way. Welcome to being a Sun Devil. But someday I have a feeling that all this angst and disappointment and emotion that we've invested in ASU athletics over the years someday will be paid off, and we'll have a big championship to celebrate with each other.
I hope so, especially that year you mentioned with Oregon State. If we didn't lose that game, I think we would have gotten into the playoff. We were like 6th spot. We were literally the first 2 out. and fortunately fell short. So, but for anybody that wants to hear you outside of Sun Devil Stadium, you also work with Skyview Networks and all that. Where can they reach you at? And is there any shows that you're hosting?
The studio that I'm in is where we broadcast Arizona News Radio newscasts every morning. We're on 32 radio stations around the state, mostly in rural Arizona, but giving them an opportunity to get news in markets where they don't have big radio news departments. But and also in California, we're on the California Headline News Network, which is heard on about 70 stations around the state there as well. So been here for over 20 years, and this is a company I love working for. So gives me the opportunity, even though I have to wake up in the middle of the night to get here because I do mornings, and that means arriving at about 4 a.m. It does allow me the opportunity to break out and do Cactus League baseball and do all the sporting events at night without any conflicts.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I do have one more thing I want you to do. Let me see if I can find it here, because I literally have heard your voice so many times. I literally have like the script memorized. But could you do a little recognition of the whole intro here? And I'll send it here in the Zoom chat just to jog your memory. But let me see if I can paste it here. Do you recognize this script here? When they announced the matchup?
I'm not seeing it, so tell me and I will repeat it.
Yeah, it's the whole good evening, everyone. Welcome to Sun Devil Stadium. And on a Thursday night in Tempe.
Okay, yeah, we can do that. Yeah. Okay, yeah. That I have memorized. Okay. So let's see. What is the program?
For ASU football. So like essentially you announcing the match.
Okay, so this Thursday, this week, we open up against NAU, right? So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Frank Cush Field at Sun Devil Stadium for NCAA college football. Tonight's opponent, the Northern Arizona University Lumberjacks. And on a Thursday night in Tempe, it's time for Sun Devil football.
That's amazing, man. I love hearing that, and still never gets old. Well, Jeff, thank you so much, and congrats on 32 years. I'm hoping we have a lot more great memories to come with ASU football and men's basketball. But thank you so much for all that you do for ASU athletics and for all the Arizona sports fans. Thanks for the memories, man. It's awesome, and I know you're not done. Still a lot of great memories to come. So I appreciate you coming on, and we wish you the best down the road.
I thank you, Caleb. Appreciate it. I am on the back nine, but I do hope to do this for a few more years while I still have my faculties about me and I can still see the field. But it's been a blast. I'm really, really lucky, and that's my advice to any future public address announcers: is realize how lucky you are, because there's always someone out there who's as good or better who can replace you. So I'm very fortunate.
Oh, well, thank you so much, man. And yeah, you're right. It is like you never want to take it for granted. So absolutely.